I'm Lucy, 28, and last Christmas my own mother humiliated me in front of our entire family. All you do is take money from us, she screamed while 20 relatives watched. You're nothing but a parasite who never contributes anything to this family. The laughter that followed still rings in my ears. I smiled, excused myself quietly, and went to my room. What happened next? Well, let me just say they learned exactly what I'd been contributing all along. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely invisible in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. That Christmas evening started like any other family gathering, my parents' house overflowing with aunts, uncles, cousins, and the usual chaos. The dining room table groaned under Mom's famous honey-glazed ham, Dad's attempt at mashed potatoes that somehow always turned out lumpy, and enough casseroles to feed a small army. Everyone was laughing, sharing stories, passing around photos on their phones. I was helping my cousin Sarah set up the dessert table when Mom's voice cut through the chatter like a knife. Lucy, come here. Now. Her tone had that edge I recognized from childhood, the one that meant I was about to be put on display for something. What's up, Mom? I asked, wiping my hands on a dish towel as I walked over to where she stood near the fireplace. The room gradually quieted as more relatives turned to watch. Tell everyone about this favor you asked for earlier, she said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. My stomach dropped. Earlier, I'd quietly mentioned that I was having a tough month financially. My car had broken down, and between the repair bill and some unexpected medical expenses, I was stretched thin. I'd asked if the family could handle the utility bills this month while I got back on my feet. It was the first time in 6 years I'd ever asked for help, but apparently that made me the family villain. Mom, I don't think... I started, but she cut me off. No, I think they should know. Lucy here thinks we should pay her bills because she can't manage her own money. The room went silent. I felt heat creeping up my neck as 20 pairs of eyes focused on me. Tell them how you waltzed in here asking for handouts like we owe you something. My brother Jake snorted from the couch. Classic Lucy. Always got her hand out. That's not what happened, I said quietly. But Mom was just getting started. 6 years you've been out of this house, and what do you have to show for it? A crappy apartment, a broken-down car, and now you want us to bail you out. Her voice was rising, and I could see relatives exchanging uncomfortable glances. Your brother never asks us for money. Your sister sends us money. The humiliation burned through me like acid. Every word was carefully chosen to cut deep, to make me look like a failure in front of people I'd known my whole life. Aunt Martha was staring at her plate. Uncle Rick looked like he wanted to disappear. My cousin Tommy actually had his phone out, probably recording this mess for social media later. All you do is take, take, take. Mom's voice reached that shrill pitch that meant she was building to her grand finale. You're nothing but a parasite who never contributes anything to this family. Everything we've given you over the years, and this is how you repay us? By asking for more? The room exploded in uncomfortable laughter. Not the warm family kind of laughter from earlier, but the nervous, awkward kind that happens when someone goes too far and everyone knows it. My face burned with embarrassment, but I kept my expression calm. Years of dealing with Mom's public displays had taught me not to give her the reaction she wanted. You're right, Mom, I said evenly. I shouldn't have asked. I turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving behind the whispered comments and uncomfortable silence. In my childhood bedroom, I sat on the edge of my old twin bed and pulled out my phone. Time to stop contributing to a family that didn't even know I was contributing in the first place. Let me back up and explain how we got to that Christmas disaster. See, my family has always had this weird dynamic where I'm simultaneously invisible and blamed for everything. It started when I was about 12 and Mom decided I was old enough to help out, while Jake and Melissa were still finding themselves. By the time I turned 18, I was basically the family's unpaid accountant, babysitter, and general problem solver. Need someone to drive Dad to his doctor's appointments? Lucy will do it. Bills getting a little tight? Lucy has a part-time job. Family gathering needs organizing? Better call Lucy. But here's the thing about being the responsible one in a family full of chaos. You become invisible. When Jake dropped out of college for the 3rd time, it was a family crisis that required intervention, support, and endless discussions about finding his path. When Melissa moved back home at 25 with a toddler and no job, everyone rallied around her, babysitting little Emma and helping her get back on her feet. When I graduated valedictorian and got accepted to 3 different colleges with partial scholarships, Dad asked if it was going to cost them anything, and when I said I'd handle it myself, the conversation ended there. So I worked 2 jobs through college, graduated debt-free, and moved into my own apartment at 22. I thought that would finally earn me some respect in the family. Instead, it just made me the one they called when they needed something fixed, paid for, or organized. The weird part was how good I got at solving their problems without them even realizing it. Take Jake's college situation. When he finally decided to go back to school at 26, he applied for financial aid, but only got partial funding. Dad promised he'd figure something out to cover the rest. But months went by without any action. I could see Jake getting stressed, calling the university every week to ask about payment extensions. The semester was about to start, and there was a real possibility he'd lose his spot. So I did what I always do. I fixed it quietly. I called the university's billing office, explained that I was Jake's sister, and wanted to set up a payment plan for his remaining balance. They were happy to work with me, and within a week, I had his account current. The bills came to an email address I helped him set up years ago for job hunting, so I was getting all the financial correspondence anyway. Jake never knew his account was in danger of being closed. Dad never knew the payment plan existed. Mom just knew that somehow everything worked out. And me? I became the invisible fairy godmother of student loan management. The same thing happened with the house bills. About 3 years ago, Mom called me crying because they'd gotten behind on the electric bill, and the company was threatening to shut off their power. Dad had been out of work for 2 months after his back surgery, and money was beyond tight. "We just need to get caught up," Mom said, her voice shaking. "Maybe you could help us figure out a payment plan or something?" So I called the electric company, sorted out a payment arrangement, and ended up just paying the past due balance myself. It was easier than watching my parents stress over it, and honestly, it wasn't that much money for me at the time. But here's where it gets interesting. The account was still in my name from when I lived there in college. I'd forgotten to change it after I moved out, and my parents never bothered to transfer it. So when I set up autopay to prevent future problems, they never even saw the bills. They just saw that the lights stayed on. Same story with the internet, the water bill, and eventually even the grocery delivery service when Mom started having trouble getting to the store after her knee surgery. My family started running on Lucy autopilot, and they didn't even realize it. The credit card thing started innocently enough. Mom was shopping online for Jake's birthday present, but her card kept getting declined. She called me frustrated, asking if I knew anything about credit limits and why her card wasn't working. I looked at her account. She'd given me access years ago to help her figure out some fraudulent charges, and realized she was maxed out and hadn't made a payment in 2 months. Instead of explaining the whole mess to her, I just added my card as a backup payment method for that one purchase. Except she never removed it, and I never brought it up. So for the next 2 years, every time her card got declined, the charges automatically went to mine. Monthly payments to stores I'd never been to, subscriptions for services I'd never heard of, even her car insurance when she forgot to update her payment information. Mom thought she was managing her money brilliantly. Look how everything always seemed to work out. She'd budget for expenses, and somehow there was always just enough room on her credit card. What she didn't realize was that just enough room was actually my entire credit limit supporting her shopping habits. The health insurance situation was probably the most ridiculous one. When I got my current job, they offered really good benefits, including the option to add family members at a huge discount. Mom had been struggling with her individual plan, high deductible, limited coverage, constantly fighting with them over claims. "It's just temporary," I told her when I added her to my policy, "until you find something better through Dad's work." That was 3 years ago. Dad's work still doesn't offer spouse coverage, and Mom is still on my plan, getting excellent health care at a fraction of what she was paying before. But in her mind, it's just another example of how things have a way of working out for her. Every single bill, every crisis, every financial emergency that should have stressed my family to the breaking point just disappeared. They started taking for granted that problems solve themselves. That's the thing about being quietly helpful. When you do it right, nobody notices you're doing anything at all. So when I finally hit my own financial rough patch and asked for help for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't just breaking the pattern of always being the giver. I was revealing exactly how much I'd been giving all along. They just didn't know it yet. The morning after Mom's Christmas performance, I woke up with a weird sense of calm. You know that feeling when you finally stop fighting against something you can't control? That was me, lying in my childhood bed at 6 a.m., staring at the ceiling and feeling oddly peaceful about what I was about to do. I made coffee in Mom's kitchen, using the fancy machine I'd bought her for Mother's Day that she'd never learned how to use properly, and sat at the dining table with my laptop and phone. Time for some digital housekeeping. First stop, Jake's college account. I logged into the payment portal and canceled the automatic payments I'd been making for 2 years. Then I sent a polite email to the billing office requesting they remove me from the account entirely and send all future correspondence directly to the student. "Family circumstances have changed," I wrote, which was certainly true. Next up, the house bills. Electric, water, internet, all still in my name, all set up on auto pay from my checking account. I methodically canceled each automatic payment and scheduled service transfers back to my parents' names. The utility companies were efficient about it. Apparently, this kind of thing happens more often than you'd think. The credit card situation required a bit more creativity. I couldn't just remove my card from Mom's account without her noticing immediately, so I called the bank and lowered my credit limit to exactly $1 above the current balance. Every new charge would be declined, and she'd have to figure out her own payment method. The health insurance took one phone call. I need to remove a dependent from my policy, I told the benefits coordinator. Family situation changed. No problem, she said cheerfully. The change will take effect at the end of this month. Should we send the termination letter to her address or yours? Hers, please. I gave her Mom's address and hung up, imagining her face when that letter arrived in a few weeks. By 9 a.m., I'd systematically dismantled 6 years of financial fairy godmother work. Every invisible support system I'd built was gone. Every safety net I'd quietly maintained was removed. Every problem I'd been solving without recognition was about to become their problem again. And you know what? It felt incredible. I spent the rest of the morning at my parents' house like nothing had happened. I helped Mom clean up from the party, listened to her replay the previous night's drama to anyone who would listen. Lucy was being so dramatic about everything. And even helped Dad fix a loose handle on their front door. But every mundane task felt different now. I wasn't the family caretaker anymore. I was just a daughter visiting her parents. When Mom mentioned that the grocery delivery was coming later and she'd forgotten to add milk to the order, I didn't offer to call and modify it. When Dad complained about how confusing the new cable remote was, I didn't offer to program it for him. You're being quiet today, Mom observed as we loaded the dishwasher. Still pouting about last night? I handed her a plate to rinse. Not pouting, just thinking. Good. I'm glad you're taking what I said to heart. Sometimes you need to hear hard truths to grow as a person. I nodded and continued loading glasses into the dishwasher. You're probably right. She seemed satisfied with that response. Crisis averted, lesson learned, family dynamics restored to normal. Except normal was about to become very different for the Anderson family. The first sign of trouble came faster than I expected. 2 days after New Year's, Jake called me at work, his voice tight with panic. Lucy, I just got this weird email from the university. They're saying my account is past due and I need to make a payment by Friday or they're going to drop my classes. That's strange, I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Did you call the billing office? Yeah, and they said my payment plan got canceled and now I owe the full balance for this semester. But Dad said he was handling my tuition. I don't understand what happened. I felt a tiny stab of guilt but pushed it away. Maybe you should talk to Dad about it. I tried, but he's being weird about it. He keeps saying he'll look into it, but Lucy, classes start next week. If they drop me, I'll lose my spot in the program. The program Jake was referring to was a specialized IT certification course that only ran twice a year. He'd been excited about it for months, talking about how it was finally going to get his career on track. Losing his spot would mean waiting another 6 months, and knowing Jake, he'd probably lose motivation entirely by then. For a moment, I wavered. It would be so easy to just call the university and reinstate the payment plan. Jake would never have to know how close he came to disaster, and I could go back to being the invisible problem solver. But then I remembered Christmas night. Mom's voice echoing through the living room. All you do is take, take, take. The uncomfortable laughter of 20 relatives who watched me get torn apart and didn't say a word in my defense. That really sucks, Jake, I said. I hope Dad figures something out. Wait, that's it? You're not going to help me? His voice shifted from panic to outrage. I mean, I know you and Mom had that thing at Christmas, but this is my education we're talking about. That thing. Like my public humiliation was just a minor family squabble that shouldn't affect his comfort level. I'm sure it'll work out, I said. Dad's pretty resourceful. After I hung up, I sat in my office chair and waited for the guilt to hit me. Jake was my little brother, even if he was 28 years old and perfectly capable of handling his own financial aid. We'd been close as kids, and part of me hated the idea of him struggling, but the guilt never came. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when it came to my family: boundaries. Have you ever watched someone you love make the same mistakes over and over again, enabling them because it was easier than watching them fail? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious if I'm the only one who's been the family safety net for way too long. The beautiful thing about being the invisible helper is that when you stop helping, it takes a while for people to notice. Like when a machine breaks down gradually, you don't realize how much you depend on it until everything stops working at once. January was the month my family's life started falling apart in slow motion. and I had a front row seat to the chaos. It started with small things. Mom called me on January 3rd, confused about why her favorite online store was declining her credit card. "It's so weird, Lucy. I know I have room on this card, but it keeps saying there's a problem." That is weird, I agreed. "Have you tried calling the credit card company?" "Well, no, I thought maybe you'd know what to do. You're so good with this computer stuff." "I think calling them directly is probably your best bet. They'll be able to tell you exactly what's wrong." There was a pause. In the old days, this was the part where I'd offer to call for her, or help her figure out alternative payment methods, or just quietly handle whatever she was trying to buy. Instead, I waited. "Oh, okay, I guess I'll do that then." She sounded genuinely surprised that I wasn't jumping in to solve her problem. Like the thought had never occurred to her that she'd have to handle her own financial issues. The next call came from Dad on January 8th. "Lucy, we got this notice from the electric company about transferring the account to our names. Did you know anything about this?" "Yeah, I called them after Christmas. All the utilities were still in my name from college, and I figured it was time to get that sorted out. But everything's been working fine the way it was." "Well, now it'll be in your names like it should be. You'll just need to set up your own payment method with them." Another pause. I could practically hear him trying to figure out why this was suddenly my responsibility. "Do you know how to do that?" he asked finally. "I'm sure they'll walk you through it when you call. They're pretty helpful." What I didn't tell him was that the electric bill was due in 5 days, and if they didn't set up payment by then, their power would be shut off. The old me would have given them a detailed timeline and step-by-step instructions. The new me figured they were grown adults who could read their own mail. Jake's tuition crisis reached a crescendo on January 12th when he called me crying, actually crying, because the university had dropped him from his classes. "Dad keeps saying he'll handle it, but he hasn't done anything. Lucy, I'm 28 years old, and I'm crying over college registration like I'm 18 again. This is humiliating." "That does sound really frustrating," I said. "Frustrating? Lucy, my entire career plan just went down the drain because Dad lied about covering my tuition. Did he lie or did he just not follow through? What's the difference?" "I'm screwed either way." Jake's voice cracked. "Look, I know you and Mom aren't speaking or whatever, but can't you just help me this once? I swear I'll pay you back as soon as I get a job." The old me might have caved at this point. Jake sounded genuinely desperate, and he was making promises about paying me back, even though he'd never paid me back for anything in his life. But I thought about Christmas again. Not just Mom's public humiliation, but Jake sitting there on the couch, snorting when she called me a parasite. He'd laughed at my expense, and now he wanted me to bail him out of the exact same financial irresponsibility that had gotten me labeled a mooch in the first place. "Jake, I really can't right now. My finances are pretty tight after the holidays." Which was true. I'd just stopped paying for half their household expenses. "But this is different. This is my future. I understand it feels urgent to you, but I just can't help right now. Maybe there are other options you could look into? Student loans or payment plans, or even a part-time job to cover the costs?" The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long I thought he'd hung up. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," he said finally. "After everything this family has done for you. Everything this family has done for me." I almost laughed. Like what? Public humiliation? Taking credit for my achievements? Ignoring my problems while demanding I solve theirs? "I'm sorry you're going through this, Jake. I really hope it works out." After I hung up, I felt that same strange peace I'd experienced on Christmas morning. Not happiness exactly, but a deep relief that I was finally out of the business of managing other people's lives. The grocery situation provided some unexpected entertainment. Mom had gotten used to having groceries delivered twice a week, a service that cost about $60 extra per month but saved her from dealing with crowds and heavy bags. What she didn't realize was that I'd been paying for the delivery service for over a year. When her first order got canceled due to payment issues, she called the grocery store to complain. According to Melissa, who heard the whole thing secondhand, Mom spent 20 minutes arguing with customer service about how she'd been a loyal customer and demanding they fix whatever computer glitch was causing the problem. They kept telling her the delivery service required a separate payment method, and she kept insisting that it had always just worked before, Melissa told me when she called to get the family gossip. She was so confused about why they were suddenly asking her to pay extra for something that used to be included. "That's weird," I said. "I wonder why the policy changed." Melissa paused. "Lucy, you didn't have anything to do with Mom's grocery delivery situation, did you?" "Why would I have anything to do with Mom's groceries?" "I don't know, it just seems like a weird coincidence that she's having all these random billing problems right after your fight at Christmas." I kept my voice innocent. "Billing problems happen all the time, especially after the holidays when people's accounts get mixed up." But I could hear the suspicion in Melissa's voice. Unlike Jake, who never paid attention to anything that didn't directly affect him, Melissa was starting to notice patterns, which meant the rest of the family would start noticing soon too. By the third week of January, the Anderson family was living in a state of low-grade financial panic, and they still had no idea why. It started becoming a thing where every family phone call turned into a litany of mysterious problems that nobody could explain. Mom's internet kept getting disconnected, even though she was sure she'd paid the bill. Dad couldn't figure out why their streaming services weren't working. Jake was still homeless from his college program and had started picking up shifts at a coffee shop to try to scrape together tuition money. The health insurance bomb dropped on January 22nd. I was at work, deep in a spreadsheet that actually mattered to my own life for once, when my phone rang. Lucy Anderson flashed on the screen, Mom's contact info, which I'd never bothered to change to anything more personal. "Lucy, I just got the strangest letter from an insurance company." Mom's voice was tight with confusion and the beginnings of panic. "They're saying my health coverage is being terminated at the end of the month, but that doesn't make sense. I've been with this company for years." I minimized my spreadsheet and leaned back in my chair. "That does sound strange. What company was it from?" "Elite Healthcare Solutions. I've never even heard of them before, but they have all my information, my social security number, my doctor's name, everything." "Lucy, I'm scared this might be some kind of identity theft." Elite Healthcare Solutions, my company's health insurance provider, the one I'd been using to cover her medical expenses for 3 years. "Did the letter say why they were terminating your coverage?" I asked. "Something about a change in employment status for the primary policyholder. But that doesn't make sense either, because I don't even work there. This has to be a mistake." I could hear her rustling papers, probably reading through the letter again and getting more confused with each word. "Have you called them to ask about it?" "Well, no. I thought maybe you'd know what to do. You're so good with these kinds of things." There it was again, the automatic assumption that I would fix whatever problem had appeared in her life. Even now, even after Christmas, her first instinct was still to outsource her responsibilities to me. "Mom, if someone is using your personal information for insurance fraud, you definitely need to call them directly. I wouldn't know anything about a company you've never heard of. But what if it's not fraud? What if somehow my real insurance got canceled by accident? Lucy, I have a mammogram scheduled next week. And if I don't have coverage..." The genuine fear in her voice tugged at something in my chest. Mom was 62 years old, and the mammogram was part of regular screening she'd been doing since her sister died of breast cancer 5 years ago. Missing it would mean months of anxiety before she could reschedule. For a moment, I considered just telling her the truth, that she'd been on my insurance for years, that I'd been covering her medical expenses because I wanted her to have good health care, that the mysterious termination letter was the result of me removing her from my policy after Christmas. But then I thought about how that conversation would go. Mom would be grateful for about 30 seconds before shifting into indignation about why I hadn't told her sooner. Then she'd be angry that I'd put her in this position by removing the coverage. Finally, she'd find some way to make it my fault that she now had to find her own insurance. I'd seen this pattern too many times before. Any help I provided retroactively became something I owed her. Any problem that resulted from me not providing help became my responsibility to solve. "Mom, I'm sure it's just a paperwork mix-up," I said. "These insurance companies make mistakes all the time. Call them tomorrow and get it straightened out. If it really is fraud, they'll help you figure out what to do." "But what about my appointment next week? You could call your doctor's office and explain the situation. They might be able to work with you on payment or help you reschedule if needed." Another long pause. I could practically hear her brain struggling to process the idea that she'd have to handle this herself. "Lucy, I don't understand what's happening. First the credit card problems, then the grocery delivery, now this insurance thing. It's like everything is falling apart at once." "That does sound stressful," I agreed. "Maybe Dad could help you make some of these phone calls?" "Your father?" Mom's voice rose an octave. "Lucy, your father can barely figure out how to use the microwave. You think he's going to understand health insurance?" "He managed to figure out employment benefits for his own job," I pointed out. "I'm sure he can handle a phone call." What followed was 10 minutes of Mom explaining why Dad was useless with paperwork, why she couldn't possibly navigate insurance bureaucracy on her own, and why this was all so overwhelming for someone her age. It was a masterclass in learned helplessness. "I just don't know what I'm going to do," she finished with a dramatic sigh. "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said. "You're more capable than you give yourself credit for." After I hung up, I sat in my office chair and stared at the ceiling. The guilt was there this time, sharp and insistent. Mom's mammogram was important. Her health concerns were legitimate. Was I really going to let my anger over Christmas put her medical care at risk? But then I thought about 3 years of insurance premiums. 3 years of deductibles and copays and pharmacy costs that I'd been covering without ever being thanked because she didn't even know I was covering them. 3 years of her bragging to her friends about her excellent health coverage without mentioning that her daughter was footing the bill. Most importantly, I thought about the fact that she was a grown woman with a husband and 2 other adult children. There was no reason her health care should be my responsibility, especially when she didn't even know I was providing it. Mom would figure out her insurance situation because she'd have to. Dad would learn to help her with paperwork because he'd have to. Jake would find a way to pay for his own education because he'd have to. And me? I'd learn what it felt like to have a family who saw me as a daughter and sister instead of a problem-solving service. The transition was messier than I'd expected, but it was also more liberating than I'd dared to hope. February was the month everything came to a head, and it started with the power getting shut off. I was at work on a Tuesday morning when Melissa called me, her voice tight with panic. "Lucy, something's wrong with Mom and Dad's house. I went over there to drop off some photos from Christmas, and there's no power. None of the lights work, the garage door won't open, nothing. Did you check if there's an outage in the neighborhood?" I asked, though I knew exactly what had happened. That's the first thing I thought of, but all the other houses on the street have power. "Lucy, what if something happened to Dad?" He was supposed to call the electric company about transferring the account, but you know how he is with phone calls. I did know how Dad was with phone calls. He'd rather clean out gutters in a thunderstorm than spend 10 minutes on hold with customer service, which explained why the electric bill had been sitting on their kitchen counter for 3 weeks, while they assumed someone else would handle it. "Have you called them?" I asked. "Called who? Mom and Dad?" "They're both at work, and Dad doesn't answer his phone during the day anyway." "Called the electric company." There was a pause. "Well, no. I thought maybe you'd know what to do first. You're good with this stuff." Even Melissa, who was generally the most self-sufficient of my siblings, had defaulted to making me the point person for our parents' crisis. It was like watching a family of adults revert to childhood the moment any problem required actual effort to solve. "Mel, if their power got shut off, it's probably because of a missed payment. Dad should call them directly to figure out what happened. But what if it's something more serious? What if there's a problem with their electrical system, or someone forgot to transfer the account like they were supposed to?" She was fishing, trying to figure out if I knew more than I was letting on. Melissa had always been the smartest of us 3 kids, and she was definitely starting to connect dots. "I guess Dad will find out when he calls them," I said. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" Another pause, longer this time. "Lucy, are you okay? You've been acting really weird since Christmas." Distant. Distant. That was one way to put it. Another way would be, no longer enabling a family of grown adults to avoid their own responsibilities. "I'm fine. Mel, just busy with work and trying to get my own finances sorted out. You know how it is." "Actually, I don't know how it is because you never talk about your finances, or your work, or anything that's going on with you, really." Her voice softened. "Look, I know Mom was harsh with you at Christmas, but that doesn't mean you have to shut all of us out." The thing about Melissa was that she'd always been the reasonable one. She'd gone to college, gotten a good job, married a decent guy, and managed her life like a functional adult. She'd never needed the same level of hand-holding that Jake and my parents required, which meant she'd never really understood how much hand-holding I'd been doing for everyone else. "I'm not shutting anyone out," I said. "I'm just not jumping in to solve problems that aren't mine to solve. Is that what this is about? Because I never asked you to solve my problems." "You're right." You didn't. But Jake did. And Mom and Dad did. And somehow I became the go-to person for every crisis, every bill, every inconvenient phone call that needed to be made. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. "Lucy." Melissa's voice was careful now, like she was talking to someone who might bolt at any moment. "What kinds of bills are you talking about?" And there it was, the question I'd been waiting for someone to ask for 3 weeks. "It doesn't matter now," I said. "But Mel, you should probably go over there after Dad gets home and make sure he calls the electric company. They'll be able to get the power turned back on once he sorts out the payment." "How do you know it's about payment?" "Because power companies don't usually shut off electricity for fun." I hung up before she could ask any more questions, but I knew the conversation wasn't over. Melissa was like a dog with a bone when something didn't make sense, and my family's sudden run of coincidental problems was definitely not making sense. The call I'd been expecting came 2 hours later. Dad's number this time. "Lucy, I need some help understanding something." His voice was tired in the way that meant he'd spent his entire lunch break on hold with customer service. "I just got off the phone with the electric company, and they're saying our account was 3 months behind before they shut us off. But that doesn't make sense. That bill comes to our house, and I always give it to your mother to handle. Did you ask Mom about it?" I tried, but she's in meetings all afternoon. Lucy, they want almost $400 to turn the power back on. $400! How does an electric bill get that high? I could hear the genuine confusion in his voice. Dad had been raised in an era where bills were predictable and manageable, where a $100 utility payment was a crisis worth discussing. The idea that his electric bill had been accumulating late fees and reconnection charges for months was probably genuinely shocking. That does sound like a lot, I agreed. Did they explain how the account got so far behind? They said payments stopped coming in November, and they sent disconnect notices in December and January. But Lucy, I never saw any disconnect notices, and your mother swears she's been paying it. November. That was when I'd moved all the utilities back to their names but forgotten that they'd need to set up new payment methods. I'd been so focused on removing myself from their accounts that I hadn't considered the gap between canceling my autopay and them figuring out how to manage their own bills. The old me would have felt terrible about this oversight. The new me realized that 3 months was plenty of time for 2 functioning adults to figure out how to pay an electric bill. Maybe the notices got lost in the mail, I suggested, or filed somewhere by accident. Maybe. Dad sounded doubtful. Lucy, I hate to ask this, but is there any way you could help us out with this payment? Just until I can figure out what went wrong with our system. There it was. The request I'd been bracing for since Christmas morning. After weeks of mysterious financial problems, after public humiliation, after years of thankless invisible support, my family's solution was still to ask me for money. Dad, I really can't right now. My own finances are pretty tight, which was becoming truer every day since I was no longer reflexively paying for everything that went wrong in their lives. But Lucy, we're sitting in a dark house. The food in the refrigerator is going to spoil. Your mother's oxygen concentrator needs electricity to run. The oxygen concentrator was new information, and it hit me like a physical blow. Mom had developed some breathing issues over the holidays. Nothing serious, but her doctor had prescribed supplemental oxygen for nighttime use. Without power, she couldn't use the machine. This was exactly the kind of detail that made me question everything I was doing. Was I really going to let my mother's health suffer because I was making a point about family dynamics? But then I thought about the past 3 months. 3 months of disconnect notices that my parents had apparently ignored or misplaced. 3 months when they could have called me, or Jake, or Melissa to ask for help understanding their billing situation. 3 months when they could have set up a payment plan, or asked the electric company for assistance, or taken any number of steps to prevent this crisis. Instead, they'd apparently decided that bills were Mom's department, that Mom had it handled, and that they didn't need to think about it until the power actually went off. Dad, have you looked into payment assistance programs? Most utility companies have options for people who are struggling financially. Lucy, I don't have time to research programs. I need to get our power turned on tonight. What about Jake and Melissa? Have you asked them for help? A long pause. Jake doesn't have that kind of money right now, and Melissa just bought a house. We can't ask her to drain her savings for our mistake, but they could ask me to drain my savings, even after Christmas, even after being called a parasite in front of the entire family. I was still their first call when money was needed. Dad, I'm really sorry about the situation, but I just can't help right now. I'm sure you'll figure something out. The silence that followed was the longest we'd ever shared. I could hear him breathing, probably trying to figure out what to say to a daughter who was refusing to bail the family out of a crisis. Lucy, he said finally, I don't know what happened between you and your mother at Christmas, but this isn't like you. You've always been the one we could count on. Always been the one they could count on. Not always been willing to help, or always been generous with family, always been the one they could count on to fix their problems so they wouldn't have to. Maybe it's time for you to count on yourselves, I said gently, and hung up. An hour later, Melissa called back. Lucy, what the hell is going on? What do you mean? I mean, Mom and Dad are sitting in a dark house with $400 worth of electrical bills they claim they never saw. Jake got dropped from his college program because of some mysterious payment issue, and you're acting like none of this has anything to do with you. I took a deep breath. It doesn't have anything to do with me. Bullshit. Melissa's voice was sharp now. Lucy, I've been thinking about this all afternoon. All of these problems started right after Christmas, right after Mom's little performance in front of everyone. These aren't coincidences. I don't know what you want me to say, Mel. I want you to tell me the truth. Were you paying their bills before this? The question hung in the air between us. Simple, direct, impossible to deflect. Some of them, I said finally. Which ones? It doesn't matter now. Lucy. Melissa's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. Which ones? I closed my eyes and felt 6 years of invisible labor condensed into a single moment of recognition. Most of them, I repeated, and heard Melissa's sharp intake of breath. Lucy, Her voice was quiet now, like she was talking to someone who'd been holding up the world without anyone noticing. How long? About 6 years. 6 years? Lucy, what the hell? Why didn't you ever say anything? I laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. Wasn't. When exactly was I supposed to bring that up? At family dinners where everyone talked about how irresponsible Jake was? Or how hard things were for mom and dad? Hey, by the way, I'm the reason your lights are still on. But 6 years of bills, Lucy. That's thousands of dollars. Try tens of thousands. The number felt strange saying out loud. I'd never actually calculated the total, probably because I knew it would make me angry. Electric, water, internet, Jake's tuition, mom's health insurance, her credit card payments, even the grocery delivery service. Melissa was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Mel? You there? Yeah. I'm here. I'm just processing. Another pause. Lucy, why? Why would you do all that without telling anyone? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself for weeks. Why had I quietly taken on the role of family financial fairy godmother? When had helping out occasionally turned into subsidizing their entire lifestyle? It started small, I said. Jake's tuition was supposed to be temporary. The electric bill was just 1 month when Dad was out of work. Mom's credit card was supposed to be a one-time thing when hers got declined. But it didn't stay small. No, it didn't. And by the time I realized how much I was doing, it felt too late to stop. They were counting on money they didn't know they were getting. If I'd pulled out suddenly, everything would have collapsed. Like it's collapsing now. Yeah, like it's collapsing now. Melissa sighed. Lucy, I had no idea. None of us did. When Mom called you a parasite at Christmas, she trailed off. When Mom called me a parasite, I was literally paying for Jake's education, her health insurance, and half their household bills. The irony wasn't lost on me. God, that must have been awful. Sitting there listening to her say those things when you were doing so much for everyone. It had been awful. But not just because of the injustice of it. It was awful because it showed me exactly how my family saw me, as someone who took from them, not someone who gave. My help had been so invisible that my own mother genuinely believed I contributed nothing to the family. So what happens now? Melissa asked. Are they going to lose the house? I don't know. They're adults, Mel. They'll figure something out. Will they, though? Lucy, Dad spent 2 hours trying to understand his electric bill today. He couldn't figure out why there were late fees. Mom called me crying because she's convinced the insurance thing is identity theft. They're not equipped to handle this stuff. Then maybe they'll learn to be. Or maybe they'll just expect you to fix it all again when things get bad enough. And there was the real fear. That my parents would wait until the situation became truly desperate. Power shut off, insurance canceled, Jake dropped from school, and then call me sobbing, asking how I could let this happen to the family. That they'd find some way to make their crisis into my responsibility. I can't go back to the way things were, I said, even if I wanted to. I'm not asking you to, but Lucy, is there some middle ground here? Some way to help them transition without letting everything fall apart? What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments. Will Lucy give in and help her family, or will she stick to her boundaries no matter what? The question hung between us. Part of me wanted to believe there was a middle ground, some way to help my family learn to be independent without watching them crash and burn. But the bigger part of me knew that any help I offered would immediately become the new normal. My family didn't do gradual transitions. They did dependency. Mel, let me ask you something. In all the years you've known me, have you ever seen Mom or Dad or Jake take responsibility for a mistake without trying to make it someone else's problem? She was quiet for a moment. That's not fair, isn't it? When Jake dropped out of college the first time, whose fault was it? His professors were too hard on him. Second time? The financial aid office screwed up his paperwork. Third time? He was going through a lot emotionally after his breakup. And when Mom's car got repossessed 2 years ago? Melissa sighed. The bank made an error with her payment schedule, even though she'd missed 4 months of payments. Lucy. And when Dad got fired from the construction job, his supervisor had it out for him, even though he'd been showing up late and calling in sick twice a week. Okay, I get your point. But that doesn't mean we should just abandon them. I'm not abandoning them. I'm letting them be responsible for their own lives for the first time in years. After I hung up with Melissa, I sat in my apartment and tried to imagine what my family was going through. Dad probably pacing around the house, trying to figure out how to pay an electric bill he didn't understand. Mom calling everyone she knew to complain about mysterious insurance problems. Jake working coffee shop shifts and blaming everyone except himself for his education crisis. For 6 years, I'd been the invisible safety net that kept them from having to face the consequences of their own choices. I'd been so good at quietly solving their problems that they'd forgotten problems were theirs to solve. Now they were about to get a crash course in adult responsibility, whether they wanted one or not. The next few weeks were like watching a train wreck in slow motion, if train wrecks made you feel simultaneously guilty and vindicated. Jake was the first to crack. He showed up at my apartment on a Friday night, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I opened the door to find my little brother, though at 28, calling him little was more habit than accuracy, standing in my hallway with grocery bags at his feet. "I brought Chinese food," he said. Like that explained everything. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and watched him carry bag after bag of takeout containers into my kitchen. Sweet and sour pork, beef and broccoli, fried rice, spring rolls, enough food for a family reunion. "Jake, this is like $60 worth of food." "I know. I wanted to make sure I got something you'd like." He was avoiding eye contact, busy unpacking containers with the focused intensity of someone trying not to have a breakdown. I thought maybe we could eat and talk. Talk about what? He finally looked at me, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Lucy, I'm working 60 hours a week between 2 jobs trying to save money for tuition. I'm sleeping on Mike's couch because I can't afford my own place. I haven't eaten anything but ramen and energy bars in 3 weeks. That sounds really hard." "It is hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, and I'm barely making a dent in what I owe." He slumped into one of my kitchen chairs. "But you know what the weird part is?" I spooned fried rice onto 2 plates and waited. "I'm actually proud of myself. For the first time in years, I'm handling my own problems. I'm not calling Dad every time something goes wrong. I'm not expecting someone else to fix my mistakes." He picked at his food. "I never realized how much I was depending on other people until I had to stop. That's a good realization to have. Lucy, I also never realized how much you were doing for me. For all of us." There it was. The conversation I'd been expecting since January. "Melissa told you. She told all of us. About the tuition payments, the bills, everything." Jake rubbed his face with his hands. "God, Lucy. My tuition alone must have cost you thousands of dollars. And I never even thanked you because I didn't know you were doing it. You weren't supposed to know. That was kind of the point. But why? Why would you pay for my education without telling me?" I thought about how to explain it without sounding either martyred or bitter. "Because I wanted you to succeed. And I could see that the money issue was the only thing standing in your way. It seemed easier to just handle it quietly than to make it a big family drama. Easier for who? For everyone. You didn't have to stress about it. Dad didn't have to admit he couldn't afford it. And I didn't have to watch you give up on something important." Jake nodded slowly. "But it wasn't easier for you." "No, it wasn't easier for me." We ate in silence for a few minutes. The Chinese food was good. Jake had remembered that I liked extra vegetables and hated MSG, and it felt weird to be sitting across from my brother having an actual conversation about feelings and consequences. "Lucy, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "Okay. Are you ever going to forgive us for Christmas?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been expecting him to ask for money, or help with his current situation, or advice about how to talk to our parents. I hadn't been expecting him to ask about forgiveness. "Jake, it's not about forgiveness." "Then what is it about?" I set down my fork and looked at my brother. Really looked at him. His face was thinner than it had been 6 months ago, probably from the ramen diet. His clothes were wrinkled from sleeping on a couch. His hands had calluses from whatever manual labor he was doing to pay his bills. But his eyes were different, clearer somehow. Like he was actually seeing the world around him instead of just floating through it, waiting for someone else to solve his problems. "It's about respect," I said finally. "For 6 years, I've been helping this family in ways no one ever acknowledged. And the first time I needed help, the first time I asked for support instead of giving it, Mom stood up in front of 20 people and called me a parasite. She didn't know because she never bothered to know. None of you did. You all just assumed that bills paid themselves, that problems solved themselves, that Lucy would handle whatever needed handling." My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Do you have any idea what it's like to be invisible to your own family?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally, "but I'm starting to understand what it's like to handle my own problems. And Lucy, it's scary as hell." "Yeah, it is." "Is that how you felt this whole time? Scared and alone and responsible for everything?" I thought about it. Not scared exactly, but definitely alone, and definitely responsible for everything. That's not fair. "No, it's not, but it's how things were." Jake pushed his food around his plate. "So what happens now? Do we just not have a family anymore?" "Jake, we're having dinner together. We're talking about real things instead of just surface stuff. We're treating each other like adults who can handle difficult conversations. This feels more like family than anything we've done in years." "But what about Mom and Dad? What about them? They're struggling, Lucy." really struggling. Dad's been working overtime to try to catch up on bills, and Mom's been cleaning other people's houses for extra money. She's 62 years old, and she's scrubbing toilets because they can't afford their electric bill. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. Mom cleaning houses, Dad working overtime with a bad back, my parents, who'd raised 3 children and worked hard their whole lives, suddenly reduced to scrambling for money to keep the lights on. That's awful, I said. I'm sorry they're going through that, but you're not going to help them. Jake, I've been helping them for 6 years. They just didn't know it. So help them now when they know they need it. I looked at my brother, sitting in my kitchen surrounded by takeout containers he probably couldn't afford, asking me to rescue the same parents who'd humiliated me 3 months ago. And I realized that nothing had really changed. Jake had learned to handle his own problems, but his solution to our parents' problems was still to ask Lucy to fix them. No, I said gently. I'm not going to help them. Lucy. Jake, you just told me that handling your own problems has been the hardest and most proud-making thing you've ever done. Why would you want to take that experience away from Mom and Dad? He stared at me like I'd suggested our parents take up skydiving. Because they're our parents. Because they're struggling. Because we're supposed to help family. You're helping family. You brought me dinner and told me you understood what I'd been going through. That's help. I stood up and started putting leftovers in containers. But asking me to go back to being the family's financial solution isn't help, Jake. It's just putting everything back the way it was. What if they can't figure it out? What if they lose the house? Then they'll figure out what to do next. Just like you did when you had to find a new place to live. Jake left that night with bags of leftovers and a frustrated expression that told me he thought I was being unreasonably stubborn. But he also hugged me goodbye for the first time in years and said, I'm proud of what you're doing, even if I don't understand it. It was the most honest thing any member of my family had said to me in longer than I could remember. The intervention happened on a Sunday in March, and I should have seen it coming. Melissa called me that morning with an invitation to family brunch at her house. Nothing formal, she said, just pancakes and coffee and a chance to catch up with everyone. It had been months since we'd all been in the same room together, and wouldn't it be nice to try to get back to normal? I should have known that normal was exactly what they wanted to get back to. I arrived at Melissa's house to find my parents' car already in the driveway, along with Jake's beat-up Honda. Through the kitchen window, I could see everyone sitting around Mel's dining table, which was set with her good plates and cloth napkins. Definitely not the casual pancake breakfast I'd been expecting. Lucy! Melissa opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm so glad you came. The dining room fell silent when I walked in. Mom and Dad were sitting across from each other at the table, both dressed like they were going to church. Jake was wearing a button-down shirt I'd never seen before. Even Melissa had traded her usual weekend sweats for slacks and a blouse. This feels very formal for family brunch, I said, taking the empty chair they'd obviously saved for me. We wanted to talk to you about something important, Dad said, cutting straight to the point in a way that was totally unlike him. About the family situation. What family situation? Mom leaned forward, her hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. Lucy, we know you're angry with us about Christmas. You have every right to be angry. I said things I shouldn't have said, and I'm truly sorry for hurting you. It was a nice apology, and it sounded almost genuine, but there was something rehearsed about the way she delivered it, like she'd been practicing in the mirror. Thank you for apologizing, I said carefully. The thing is, Dad continued, we're hoping we can put all that behind us and work together as a family to solve some of the problems we're facing. What kind of problems? Financial problems, Melissa said, and I noticed she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Mom and Dad are having trouble catching up on bills after everything that happened in January. And Jake is still trying to get back into school, Mom added. He's working so hard, but the tuition costs are just overwhelming for someone his age. I looked around the table at my family, all dressed up and sitting in their assigned seats, delivering their carefully prepared speeches about family problems that needed solving. It was like watching a board meeting where I was the CEO being asked to approve a budget. Okay, I said. What does any of this have to do with me? The question seemed to catch them off guard. Dad glanced at Mom. Mom looked at Melissa. Jake stared at his coffee cup. Well, Melissa said finally, we thought maybe you could help them get back on track, just temporarily until they get caught up. Help them how? Financially, Jake said quietly, like you were doing before. And there it was. The real reason for the formal family meeting, the good plates, the rehearsed apologies. They wanted me to go back to being their invisible safety net. So, let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said, keeping my voice level. You want me to start paying your bills again? Just temporarily, Mom said quickly, until we get back on our feet. How long is temporarily? Another round of glances. No one had thought that far ahead. Maybe 6 months, Dad suggested. A year at most. And what happens after that year? Well, by then, we'll have figured out a better system for managing everything, Melissa said. What kind of system? I don't know, Lucy. A budget or a payment plan or something. The point is, right now they need help, and you're in a position to provide it. I sat back in my chair and looked at each of them in turn. My parents, who had been living above their means for so long they'd forgotten what their actual means were. Jake, who was finally learning to support himself but wanted to take a shortcut back to dependency. Melissa, who had never needed my help but was perfectly comfortable asking me to provide it for everyone else. No, I said. Lucy, please. Mom's voice cracked. I'm 62 years old. I can't keep working 2 jobs and cleaning houses just to keep the lights on. So don't. What do you mean? I mean, find a solution that doesn't involve me paying for your life. I turned to Dad. You said you wanted to put Christmas behind us and work together as a family. This isn't working together. This is asking me to go back to being your personal bank account. That's not what this is, Melissa protested. Isn't it? Because it sounds exactly like what this is. I stood up. For 6 years, I quietly paid for Jake's education, your health insurance, your credit cards, your utility bills. I never asked for recognition or thanks. I never made it a family issue. I just handled it because I could and because I love you. We know, Jake said. And we're grateful. You're grateful now. But where was the gratitude when Mom called me a parasite in front of 20 people? Where was the gratitude when you laughed at her calling me a parasite? Lucy, we didn't know, Dad said. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. You wanted to believe that your financial problems just magically solved themselves. You wanted to believe that Jake's tuition was covered by some mysterious scholarship. You wanted to believe that I was the family member who took from you instead of the family member who gave to you. The silence around the table was deafening. So here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to figure out your own financial solutions, just like every other adult in the world. You're going to make budgets and payment plans and tough choices about what you can and can't afford. And you're going to do it without making it my responsibility to fund your lifestyle. But Lucy, Mom's voice was small now. What if we can't? What if we lose the house? Then you'll figure out what to do next. You'll downsize or move somewhere cheaper or ask Jake and Melissa for help or apply for assistance programs. You'll do what millions of families do when they can't afford their current situation. You're really not going to help us? Jake asked. I'm going to help you by not helping you, I said. I'm going to let you be the independent, capable adults you actually are, instead of the helpless victims you're pretending to be. I walked toward Melissa's front door, leaving behind the formal place settings and the carefully planned intervention. Lucy, wait, Melissa called after me. I turned back. Mel, in all the years I was paying for everyone's bills, did any of you ever once consider what that was costing me? Not just money, but time and stress and energy? Did any of you ever wonder if I needed help with my own problems? She looked genuinely confused. But you never seemed like you needed help, because I never asked for it, because I learned that asking for help meant getting humiliated in front of the entire family. I opened the front door. Maybe it's time for all of you to learn what I learned. How to solve your own problems without making them someone else's responsibility. I left them sitting around Melissa's dining table with their good plates and their rehearsed speeches and their assumption that family meant Lucy fixes everything. For the first time since Christmas, I felt completely free. April brought the phone calls. They started around dinner time on weeknights, when I was unwinding from work and trying to convince myself that I was doing the right thing. Mom would call first, her voice shaky with what sounded like genuine panic. Lucy, the mortgage payment is due tomorrow, and we're still $300 short. I've been calling around to see if anyone can help, but have you talked to the bank about a payment plan? They said they might be able to work something out, but it would take weeks to process, and we need help now. What about asking Melissa or Jake? Melissa is saving for her own house, and Jake barely has enough for rent. Lucy, you know we wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. The calls had a pattern. Crisis, urgency, other family members can't help. Lucy is the only solution. Sometimes it was the mortgage. Sometimes it was medical bills Mom couldn't afford. Sometimes it was car repairs Dad needed to keep getting to work. Every call ended the same way, with me saying I couldn't help and Mom or Dad acting like I was abandoning the family in their darkest hour. Jake's calls were different. Less manipulation, more genuine confusion. Lucy, I don't understand what you want from us. You say you want us to be independent, but you won't help us get to a place where we can be independent. How are Mom and Dad supposed to figure out a budget when they're already behind on everything? The same way everyone else figures out budgets when they're behind on everything. They make hard choices and cut expenses and maybe ask for professional help. But we're family. Family is supposed to help family. Jake, I helped family for 6 years. Now it's someone else's turn. Someone else like who? Like you. Like Melissa. Like mom and dad helping themselves. Lucy, I'm working 2 jobs and sleeping on a couch. I don't have money to help them. Then maybe they need to find solutions that don't require money from their children. The conversation that changed everything came from Melissa on a Thursday night in late April. She called while I was making dinner, her voice tight with frustration. Lucy, this has gone far enough. What has gone far enough? This whole thing. This punishment you're putting the family through. Mom and dad are talking about filing for bankruptcy. Jake is never going to get back to school at this rate. Everyone's miserable, and for what? To prove a point? To prove what point exactly? That you were helping us before and we didn't appreciate it enough. Okay, point proven. We get it now. You were generous and we were ungrateful. Can we move on? I set down my wooden spoon and turned off the stove. Mel, do you think that's what this is about? Appreciation? Isn't it? This is about the fact that you just called it a punishment. Like me not paying your bills is a punishment I'm inflicting on you instead of a normal boundary that most families have. Lucy, be realistic. Most families don't have someone who can afford to pay everyone else's bills. Most families also don't have someone willing to pay everyone else's bills. But let's say I could afford it. Let's say I won the lottery tomorrow and had unlimited money. Do you think it would be healthy for me to spend the rest of my life making sure none of you ever had to handle your own financial problems? Melissa was quiet for a moment. I don't know. I never thought about it that way. I've been thinking about it that way for months. And the answer is no, it wouldn't be healthy. Not for me and not for any of you. But Lucy, what if something really bad happens? What if dad has a heart attack and can't work? What if mom gets sick and needs expensive treatment? Are you really going to let us figure that out alone? It was a fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with since January. Where was the line between healthy boundaries and actual abandonment? If my family faced a genuine emergency, would I really stand by and watch them struggle? Mel, if dad has a heart attack, I'll be there to support him and help navigate medical decisions and make sure he gets the care he needs. If mom gets sick, I'll research doctors and treatment options and be there for every appointment. But you won't help financially. I won't automatically become responsible for financing every crisis. There's a difference between being supportive and being a personal bank account. What if they lose the house? Then we'll figure out what comes next. Together, as a family, with everyone contributing ideas and solutions instead of everyone looking to me for money. Melissa sighed. I still think you're being too rigid about this. Maybe I am. But Mel, for 6 years I was too flexible about it. I bent over backward to accommodate everyone else's financial irresponsibility, and it nearly broke me. Maybe rigid is what I need right now. After we hung up, I finished making dinner and ate it alone in my apartment, thinking about flexibility and rigidity and the space between support and enablement. The knock on my door came at 8 o'clock, just as I was settling in with a book and a cup of tea. Through the peephole, I could see my parents standing in the hallway, both looking older and more tired than I remembered. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. Lucy, Dad said, we need to talk. About what? About this situation, about the family. Mom stepped closer. Sweetheart, we're at the end of our rope. The bank is threatening foreclosure. I can't afford my medications. Your father's back is getting worse, but we can't afford the physical therapy his doctor recommended. I'm sorry to hear that. Lucy, please. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I know you're angry with us and you have every right to be, but we're drowning here. We need help. What kind of help? Financial help, Dad said bluntly. We need you to start covering some of the major bills again, just until we can get back on track. How long would that take? We don't know. Maybe a year, maybe longer. And what would you be doing during that year to get back on track? They looked at each other uncertainly. Making a budget? Mom suggested. Learning to manage money better? Dad added. Those sound like things you could do now, without my financial support. Lucy, Mom's voice broke. We raised you. We fed you and clothed you and put a roof over your head for 18 years. Doesn't that count for something? And there it was. The argument I'd been waiting for since Christmas. The idea that children owe their parents indefinite financial support as payment for being raised. Mom, it counts for a lot. It counts for me loving you and wanting you to be happy and healthy. It counts for me being here to support you through difficult times. But not financially. Not financially. Dad stepped forward. Lucy, what if we promised to pay you back? What if we made this a loan instead of a gift? Dad, you can't afford your current bills. How would you afford your current bills plus loan payments to me? We'd figure something out. Like what? I don't know, Lucy. We'd figure something out. I looked at my parents, standing in my hallway with their desperate faces and their vague promises to figure something out. 6 months ago, I would have immediately started brainstorming solutions. I would have researched assistance programs and payment plans and loan modification options. I would have made their crisis my project. Instead, I felt calm, clear, certain. Mom, Dad, I love you both very much, but I'm not going to resume paying your bills. Not temporarily, not as a loan, not under any circumstances. You need to find other solutions. What solutions? Mom demanded. What magical solutions do you think we have that we haven't already tried? The same solutions that millions of families use when they can't afford their lifestyle. Downsizing, selling things, moving somewhere cheaper, getting additional jobs, asking for help from agencies that exist to help people in financial crisis. Those aren't real solutions, Dad said. They're not easy solutions, I corrected. But they're real solutions, and they're your solutions to figure out. I closed the door gently but firmly, leaving my parents in the hallway to figure out what came next. For the first time since Christmas, I slept through the night without worrying about anyone else's problems. The breaking point came in May, exactly 6 months after Christmas, when they all showed up at my apartment building at 7 in the morning. I was getting ready for work when the buzzer from the lobby rang. The doorman's voice crackled through the intercom. Miss Anderson, you have several visitors here. Your parents, your brother, and your sister. They're asking to come up. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, half-dressed, hair still damp from the shower, mascara wand in my hand, and realized this was it. The moment I'd been bracing for since January. The final coordinated assault on my boundaries. Send them up, please. I finished getting ready with the sound of footsteps and urgent voices in the hallway outside my apartment. When I opened the door, they were arranged like a delegation. Mom and Dad in front, Jake and Melissa flanking them, all wearing expressions of grim determination. We need to talk, Mom announced, pushing past me into my living room. Good morning to you too, I said, closing the door behind them. Can I offer anyone coffee? Lucy? Sit down, Dad said in the voice he'd used when I was in trouble as a kid. This has gone on long enough. I remained standing and crossed my arms. What has gone on long enough? This tantrum, Melissa said. This punishment you're inflicting on the whole family because you're angry about Christmas. We're here to present you with an ultimatum, Jake added, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. We've all talked about it, and we've decided that this ends today. An ultimatum. They'd organized an ultimatum. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Okay, I said. Let's hear it. Jake unfolded the paper and began reading like he was delivering a formal legal document. Lucy Anderson, we, your family, are giving you one final opportunity to resume your financial support of this household. If you agree to help with the monthly bills and ongoing expenses, we're willing to forget about the past 6 months and go back to the way things were before. And if I don't agree, then you're no longer welcome at family gatherings, Mom said, her voice shaking with either anger or nerves. No more holiday dinners, no more birthday parties, no more family events. You'll be choosing to exclude yourself from this family. I stared at them. These 4 people I'd spent my entire life loving and supporting and trying to please, and felt something shift inside me. Not sadness or anger or fear, but a strange kind of relief. You're disowning me unless I agree to pay your bills. We're protecting ourselves from someone who's clearly chosen money over family, Dad said. I've chosen money over family? I laughed, and it came out sharper than I intended. I spent 6 years choosing family over money. I chose your financial stability over my own financial security. I chose Jake's education over my own savings. I chose Mom's health insurance over my own emergency fund. And we're grateful for that, Melissa said quickly. But Lucy, that doesn't give you the right to abandon us when things get hard. Things got hard in January. It's been 5 months. How much harder do they need to get before you figure out solutions that don't involve me? We have figured out solutions, Mom said. The solution is that you resume helping us like you did before. That's not a solution. That's just going backward. Jake stepped forward, still holding his piece of paper like it gave him some kind of authority. Lucy, we've made our position clear. Either you start paying for things again, or you're not part of this family anymore. I walked to my kitchen counter and picked up my purse and keys. Okay. Okay, what? Okay, I choose not to be part of this family anymore. I headed for the door. I have to get to work now. Please lock up when you leave. The silence behind me was deafening. I could feel them staring at my back, probably waiting for me to turn around and say I didn't mean it, that I was just making a point, that of course I'd rather pay their bills than lose them entirely. Instead, I opened my apartment door and walked out. Lucy, wait! Melissa called after me. I stopped and turned back. Mel, you just told me that my value to this family is measured in dollars. You just threatened to disown me unless I agree to fund your lifestyle. You want to know what I learned in 6 months of not being your personal bank account? What? I learned that I'm a complete person all by myself. I have friends who like me for who I am, not what I can do for them. I have a career that fulfills me. I have hobbies and interests and goals that have nothing to do with solving other people's problems. I looked at each of them standing in my hallway. I learned that I don't need a family that only values me for my money. That's not what this is about, Dad protested. Isn't it? Because you just gave me an ultimatum. Pay our bills or lose us. That sounds exactly like a family that only values me for my money. I turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving behind 4 people who'd finally shown me exactly what I meant to them. In the elevator, descending toward the lobby, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete freedom from other people's expectations. It was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely right. The first Christmas without them was actually peaceful. I spent December 25th in my apartment, wearing pajamas until noon and making pancakes from scratch while snow fell outside my windows. I video called my college roommate who'd moved to Seattle, exchanged texts with a few work friends, and read an entire book without anyone calling to ask me to solve their problems. It was the first Christmas morning in my adult life where I wasn't stressed about family dynamics or worried about who might have a crisis that needed fixing. Just me, my coffee, and the kind of quiet that comes from not being responsible for anyone else's happiness. Around 3 o'clock, my phone rang. Melissa's name on the screen. Merry Christmas, Lucy. Merry Christmas, Mel. How are you spending the day? Quietly. How about you? How's the family gathering? A pause. Small. Just me and Jake and Mom and Dad. It's different without you here. I waited for her to get to the point. Melissa wasn't calling just to exchange pleasantries. Lucy, I wanted to tell you something about the past year. Okay, I was wrong. About the ultimatum, about calling it a tantrum, about all of it. I spent the last 6 months watching Mom and Dad figure out their finances and watching Jake learn to budget and save money, and I was wrong. How so? They're all more capable than I gave them credit for. Dad learned to use online banking and set up automatic payments. Mom got a part-time job she actually enjoys and started using coupons like it was a hobby. Jake saved enough money to enroll in a community college program, and he's so proud of himself for earning it. I smiled despite myself. That all sounds really good. It is good. But Lucy, the thing I realized is that none of it would have happened if you'd kept paying for everything. They would have just stayed comfortable and dependent. And Jake would have stayed irresponsible, and nothing would have changed. Probably not. Definitely not. And I also realized something else. Her voice got quieter. I realized that I spent 6 years watching you take care of everyone else, and never once asked if you needed anything. I never asked how you were doing, or if you were stressed about money, or if you needed help with anything. Mel, I was a terrible sister, Lucy. Not because I didn't contribute money to the family bills, I shouldn't have had to, but because I didn't contribute attention to your well-being. I treated you like a resource instead of a person. The words hit harder than I'd expected. Of all the things my family had done over the years, the invisibility had been the hardest part. The way they'd all just assumed I was fine. I was handling everything. I didn't need anything from them. Thank you for saying that. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I miss you. We all miss you. I miss you too, Lucy. I know you probably don't want to hear this, but would you consider having coffee with me sometime? Just the two of us. No agenda, no family drama. I'd like to get to know my sister as a person instead of as the family problem solver. I looked out my apartment window at the snow-covered street below, thinking about second chances and new relationships and the difference between missing someone and missing what they used to do for you. I'd like that, I said. But Mel, I need you to understand something. I'm not coming back to being the family bank account. Ever. If that's what you're hoping for, it's not. I swear, Lucy, it's not. I just want to have a relationship with my sister that's based on actually liking each other instead of financial obligation. Then yes, let's have coffee. After we hung up, I curled up on my couch with my book and thought about the past year. The humiliation of Christmas morning felt like a lifetime ago. The desperate phone calls and manipulation attempts had stopped months ago. The ultimatum in my hallway seemed like something that had happened to someone else. In the space where family crisis management used to live, I'd built a life that was entirely my own. I'd taken up pottery classes and joined a hiking group. I'd started dating someone who knew nothing about my family dynamics and liked me just fine as I was. I'd gotten a promotion at work because I finally had the mental energy to focus on my own career instead of everyone else's problems. My savings account, no longer being drained by other people's emergencies, had grown enough that I'd started looking at houses. Not apartments, houses. With yards and guest rooms and space for the life I was building. The guilt that had followed me through January and February had gradually been replaced by something I'd never experienced before. the confidence that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My phone buzzed with a text message, Jake's number. "Merry Christmas, sis. I know we're not talking as a family, but I wanted you to know that I graduated from my program last week with a 3.8 GPA. I paid for every credit hour myself, and I've never been more proud of anything in my life. Thank you for forcing me to grow up. I love you." I smiled and typed back, "I'm so proud of you. Love you too." As afternoon faded into evening, I made myself a simple dinner and thought about the Christmas that had started everything. Mom's voice echoing through the living room. "All you do is take, take, take." The laughter of relatives who'd watched me get humiliated and said nothing. If I could go back to that moment, I wondered, would I do anything differently? Would I defend myself instead of walking away quietly? Would I explain exactly what I'd been contributing before canceling all the payments? Probably not. Because the quiet exit, the systematic removal of support, the months of letting them figure things out for themselves, it had all led to this. Jake learning to be responsible for his own education, my parents discovering they were more capable than they'd realized, Melissa recognizing that family meant more than financial obligation, and me learning that I was worth more than what I could provide for other people. The snow kept falling outside my windows as I settled in for a peaceful evening alone. Somewhere across town, my family was probably finishing up their Christmas dinner, maybe talking about whether to call me, maybe missing the way I used to organize everything and make sure nothing went wrong. But that Lucy, the one who solved everyone else's problems and absorbed everyone else's crises, was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It was the best Christmas gift I'd ever given myself. Next Christmas, there was an invitation, handwritten from Melissa, asking if I'd like to join them for a small, low-key holiday dinner. No expectations, no drama, just family trying to figure out how to be family again. I thought about it for a week before responding, not because I was angry anymore, but because I wanted to be sure I was going for the right reasons. Not out of obligation or guilt or the old need to keep everyone else happy, but because I genuinely wanted to see the people my family had become in the year since the ultimatum. When I arrived at my parents' house on Christmas Eve, the decorations were simpler than they'd been in years. No elaborate displays or expensive wreaths, just lights on the tree and a few candles on the mantel. It felt warmer somehow, more authentic. Mom hugged me at the door like she wasn't sure I'd let her, then stepped back to look at me. "You look good, sweetheart. Really good." "Thanks. So do you." And she did. Mom looked healthier than I'd seen her in years, like she'd stopped carrying the weight of problems she couldn't solve. Her new part-time job at a local bookstore had given her something to be excited about, and it showed. Dad was in the kitchen, actually cooking, wearing an apron that said, "World's Okayest Chef." He'd learned to make a few basic meals over the past year, partly out of necessity, and partly, I suspected, because he'd discovered he enjoyed it. Jake was there with a girlfriend I'd never met, both of them talking animatedly about the IT certification program he'd completed, and the job he'd landed with a local tech company. He looked older, more settled, like someone who'd figured out how to build a life instead of just stumbling through one. Melissa had brought photo albums from the past year, pictures of family dinners and birthday celebrations and ordinary Tuesday nights that looked more relaxed than our family gatherings had been in years. "We thought you might want to see what you missed," she said, settling next to me on the couch. The photos told a story I hadn't expected. My family learning to function without me, my parents looking genuinely happy instead of quietly stressed. Jake and Melissa helping with meals and cleanup instead of assuming someone else would handle it. Everyone looking less frantic, more present, more like they were enjoying each other's company instead of just getting through it. "You all look really good," I said, and meant it. "We learned some things," Dad said from his spot by the tree, "about depending on each other instead of depending on one person to fix everything. We learned that we'd been taking advantage of you for years," Mom added quietly, "and that we're actually more capable than we thought we were when we have to be." The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had as a family. Real talk about money and responsibility and the difference between helping and enabling. Honest acknowledgement of the ways they'd all contributed to a dynamic that had been unhealthy for everyone, especially me. But mostly it was just normal. Family dinner without crisis or drama or anyone looking to me to solve their problems. Jake told funny stories about his terrible early jobs. Melissa shared pictures of the house she was renovating. Mom and Dad talked about their retirement plans like people who'd figured out how to live within their means. I found myself relaxing in a way I'd never been able to relax at family gatherings before. Not because I was responsible for making sure everything went smoothly, but because I was just Lucy, there to enjoy dinner and conversation with people I loved. When it was time to leave, Mom walked me to my car. "Mom, Lucy, I need to say something." I waited. I was wrong about calling you a parasite, about not appreciating everything you were doing for us, about all of it. But mostly I was wrong about thinking that's what family was supposed to be. You teaching us that we could take care of ourselves was the best gift you ever gave us, even though it was hard, especially because it was hard. Hard things are usually the things worth doing. I hugged my mother goodbye and drove home through the quiet streets, thinking about hard things and worth and the long journey from resentment to forgiveness to something better than either. That Christmas, for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I had a family instead of a job. The next November, I closed on my house. 2 bedrooms, a small yard, a kitchen with enough space for a proper dining table. Jake helped me move, and Melissa organized a housewarming party. Mom brought a casserole she'd made herself, and Dad fixed the wobbly front step without being asked. Everyone pitched in because that's what families do, not because one person is responsible for everything, but because everyone is responsible for something. On Christmas morning, we had dinner at my house for the first time. My table, my dishes, my carefully planned menu. Everyone brought something to contribute, everyone helped with cleanup, and everyone left feeling full and happy and grateful for the year we'd had. As I loaded the last of the plates into my dishwasher that night, I thought about the Christmas 3 years earlier that had changed everything. The humiliation that had felt so devastating at the time had actually been a gift, forcing me to see patterns I'd been too close to recognize and make changes I'd been too scared to attempt. My family didn't need a caretaker. They needed to learn that they were capable of taking care of themselves. And I didn't need to be indispensable to be loved. Some people might call what I did harsh or unforgiving. They might say that family should help family no matter what. But I learned that there's a difference between helping and enabling, between supporting and substituting yourself for someone else's responsibility. The woman who sat in that Christmas dinner 3 years ago, quietly absorbing public humiliation while secretly funding her family's entire lifestyle, was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just comfortable dysfunction dressed up as devotion. And the family sitting around my dinner table, contributing to the meal and the cleanup and the conversation, was better than the one that had taken me for granted for years. That Christmas, nobody laughed at my expense, because I was no longer the family member they could count on to absorb their problems. I was just Lucy, and that was more than enough.